Hola, chicas. Welcome to Encuentras, Your Voice podcast, showcasing Latinas as they share their journey from ancestry to authenticity, discovering that aha moment of self-love in the cultura and the thriving success that follows. I'm your host, Consuelo Crosby, here with you every Wednesday at 5 p.m. sunny California Pacific time to amplify the Latina narrative straight from the source. Our gracious guests who give their time to illuminate family heritage, speak to pain points of self-identity, and celebrate successes of living an authentic life. Now, this time of year begins so much celebration as we head into Hispanic and Latina Heritage Month. It's next week and it just keeps rolling into the end of the year holidays, including my October birth month. And we're so eager, even though we do this every single week, we are so eager to put the full-blown hot spotlight center ring focus of each and every one of our guests and the comunidad as a whole. And for as much as many of us absolutely love this time of year, we start pulling out the pumpkin decor, we start thinking about our Dia de los Muertos, our cozy blankets, our spice candles, the parties we're going to go to, the salsa dancing. We may also begin to feel the pressures of what else this brings. It could be the feeling of the pressure of Q4 ending and needing to meet work expectations. School finals, kids wanting costumes and presents and attendance at your school, and the pressure of holiday dinners, whether it's prepping and hosting, or having the family all together to bring up the topics that test your boundaries. It can all become too overwhelming, especially if we are already on the edge of burnout. Burnout is something we hear often on this podcast because of the burden of cultural expectations, stressors of embracing cultural identity, and the threats to live authentically, all leading to burnout from roles we never chose for ourselves. But rarely is it ever discussed in the cultura. Definitely not using that term, and often seen as a weakness. If you were to give up, to quit, or not take on just one more thing. Well, that all ends today, ladies, as we learn the signs, symptoms, and solutions that help you reclaim a balanced life filled with joy and defined on your terms. Our amazing guest, Ellyn Schinke, is burnout specialist and host of the Burnout-proof podcast, where she helps us realize why we feel the way we do, what it means when it comes to the burnout type, and what can be done to bring back that happy, easygoing self that revels in life freely. Ellyn experienced her own pressures from family opinions and expectations, and realizing she needed outside validation, which all led to her own moment of burnout. It was then that she left her PhD program in science and sat with herself to claim her authenticity. The result? Realizing a cold research cubicle was just not her thing. She's a people lover, and helping others out of or even avoiding the darkness and pain of burnout is her passion. Ellyn's energy and enthusiasm alone are a lifesaver, helping us to breathe in, feel seen, understood, and ultimately for us to realize we're not alone on this journey to finding that authentic life, putting up our boundaries, and letting go of things that we should never have taken on to begin with. So sit back, take that deep breath, and get ready to find out what may have you off your game and eagerly looking forward to all the coming celebrations without any threat of burnout as we listen and learn from Ellyn Schinke. Welcome to Encuentras, Your Voice podcast. Ellyn, so grateful that you're here and so valuable that you're here, ready to share your insights of burnout and also how to avoid it from Coach Ellyn, a burnout-proof podcast. Welcome to the show. So grateful you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It's a good thing to get as many people on board as we can to help Latina population, our listeners, first gens and onward, of getting some indicators. Maybe when you're seeing burnout coming, how to personally deal with it. We're so excited to get as much as possible because like we shared on your podcast that I was already on, burnout happens young in the Latina population. But first, let's hear about you. Give us what's all about Ellyn.
Oh, well, whenever people ask, like, tell me about yourself, especially in relation to what I do, I always actually like to throw it back to teenage years because I believe for a lot of us, we are breaking decades worth of bad habits by the time we get into adulthood. And the sooner we can recognize it, the better. So honestly, you have teenagers in your life in any capacity, this is worth sharing it with that. Because when I was a teenager, I was an exceptionally externally validated human. I did a lot of the things in my life and made a lot of the decisions in my life for other people, for mom and dad. I wanted to be told that I was doing a good job. I wanted to be seen as like the good girl who's checking all the boxes and doing all the things that she's supposed to be doing. And that was kind of how I operated in terms of my entire education, in my academic career, and also in terms of how I chose my career path. Like I wanted my career to be something that people were also impressed by and that I got validation that way. So I chose science as my career. And I always like to throw the caveat in there. I do enjoy science. I am a science nerd at heart. I don't think I would have picked science if I didn't enjoy it in some capacity, but there was definitely a big reason why I chose it was because of that kind of impressed reaction that people would have of, oh my God, that sounds really hard. You sure you want? I was going to be a microbiology and genetics major. Like, if that doesn't scream nerd, I don't know what does. And people would react exactly how you did. And I got this like sick, twisted validation and satisfaction out of it. It almost didn't matter how much I liked it because of how people would react to it. Simultaneously with that, I was somebody who, because I liked being validated and told I was doing a good job and I liked to impress people, I did all the things. Like when I was in high school, I was in like 80 bajillion AP classes. I played 4 years of varsity soccer and was on a club team. I was the captain of my varsity soccer team. I also did like piano and voice lessons. I did so many things. People were always just like, how do you do all of that? And I'm like, I don't know, I just do. But like, again, validation and praise and impressing people. And I did the same thing. That was like my track record. I did the same thing in college. I did the same thing in graduate school. And I think we all hit a point in our lives where the ways in which we operated no longer work anymore. And that was graduate school for me. Graduate school was when I burned out, and it was burnout in the physical capacity. Like there was physical exhaustion, there was mental exhaustion, there was emotional exhaustion. And I just tried to power through it because that's always what I'd done. Like I'd been tired before. I'd maybe even been a little emotionally exhausted before, but I don't think I would have ever described it in that sense. And I would just power through. I would just keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. You're going to be Dr. Ellyn. Everybody's going to be proud of you. But I hit a point where, frankly, the external validation no longer was enough to overcome how I felt on the inside, how physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausted I felt. And that is when I accidentally found coaching, which then proceeded to throw a monkey wrench into the rest of my life now in retrospect, in the best possible way.
You're right. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of similarity. Different pathways probably with our Latina listeners, but coming to that aha moment, which can be really ugly sometimes.
Oh gosh, it was ugly. Yeah.
This is not sustainable. This is not sustainable, and this is not who I am. So how did that moment of accidentally finding coaching, what was it that triggered the aha moment in you?
There was probably a couple aspects of it. First and foremost, I kind of realized that the way in which I was operating wasn't supporting me. Like the way in which I was operating was burning me out. I was putting on weight. I was struggling with my self-care. all of these different things that were coming up. And I was just like, I'm not this person. I've been an athlete since I was younger, and I'm not this person who doesn't take care of themselves physically. But I also feel like a big aspect of it is when I found coaching and when I started teaching people what I was learning, because, if you Google burnout, it's literally like work less, sleep more, quit your job. That's like what Google tells you when it comes to Googling burnout. And I'm like, thank you.
Oh, that's just so easy.
Thank you
if
for
it
being
were that
unhelpful.
easy, we would have done it.
Exactly. And frankly, I'm a big believer that quitting your job, if you are a high achiever in particular, which a lot of people are who get into this space, quitting your job isn't going to do anything. You are just going to burn out in the next job. Like, it's just going to be this cyclical pattern that's going to happen. I started doing kind of what scientists do best, and I just researched the living heck out of burnout. And I started teaching people what I was learning from a self-care perspective, from a personal growth perspective, from a clarity perspective. I started teaching people, and I realized, oh my God, I have never felt so fulfilled by anything that I've ever done. And I, at that point in time, had literal publication from my science research. And I had never felt as fulfilled as I did helping people. So I think that was the first big aha, was realizing that work could be very internally validating and internally fulfilling with literally and no outside input necessary. That was the first big aha. But I was stubborn. I am a Taurus, so I am a very stubborn human. And I wouldn't quite let go of science. I actually spent the next almost 3 years still pursuing my PhD because I just couldn't let it go. And I think the moment happened for me, there was kind of I had an avalanche of low points prior to my dropping out of graduate school. A big trigger for me was my late grandpa passed away in 2015. Here I am, 3,000 miles across the country. And I realized, my cousins are all at my grandma's house, cheersing with gin because that was grandpa's drink of choice. I'm 3,000 miles across the country doing something that I don't love. Why am I here? So it was that. Later in the summer, it was an avalanche of low points. I literally went home for the funeral. I came back. Somebody had sideswiped my car. 2 weeks after that, I broke my elbow. It was the first bone I broke. And then a month after that, this summer was rough. A month after that, I had a meeting with a supervisor, somebody who was helping me with my graduate research. And I will never forget this meeting because I would change slides and they wouldn't even give me an opportunity to explain what was on the slide and explain what's happening. They would just start ripping it apart. And I remember going to the back of the room after that meeting, and I had the thought to myself of, I'm in school to learn, and I don't feel like I'm learning anything. I feel like I'm beating my head against a wall. Why am I here? I was chasing Dr. Ellyn because Dr. Ellyn sounds really cool. It was my income, and mom and dad were proud of me. And that no longer seemed like enough of a reason to get my PhD. So I dropped out.
Yeah. Yeah. The universe was just like, darn it, Ellyn, would you pay attention to what's going on? Something has got to stop this woman. Bam, bam.
The universe was just like, I know you're stubborn, but damn, girl, can you just listen to what I'm telling you? There's so many arguments to be made for being the person who does it right. But it's often not about the person. It's about the culture. And I think that was what I realized I didn't want. I didn't want a publish or die culture. I didn't want a lifestyle where I would be penalized for having a life outside of my career. I don't think science collectively is like that. And I frankly didn't care enough about being a scientist to fight that battle. I think you have to care a lot about the career path you're choosing to fight that battle. And I just didn't.
There it is. That's the key point right there. It has to be your passion. It's not about the money. It's not about the accolade. And the toxic environment that it can still be for a lot of women doesn't really affect you because it is your passion. So that's maybe one of the first indicators. Why did coaching then seem to grab your passion? I think something that I've always struggled with professionally is feeling pigeonholed. I never liked
that with science, you have to really specialize. The world was my oyster as a coach. It felt like there are so many different things I could do. There's so many different ways I could make an impact. I could, write a book. I could be a speaker. I could have a membership. I could work with clients one-on-one. Like there just felt like there was so much more possibility. And as somebody who is multi-passionate, that really, really intrigued me. With coaching, I could have a 45-minute conversation with a coaching client. And that 45-minute conversation could absolutely change their life or change the way that they think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so exciting to me, that these things that I was passionate about, suddenly I could give somebody the tools, or I could help somebody make the mindset shift that is literally going to change the rest of their life. And I loved that.
There's one component that I find that you're not bringing up is that you really love people.
I do.
You really love people, not just the outcome. You miss being with your cousins. You missed being with the family. You missed. It's like, I can't imagine someone who's so people focused being in a little lab coat in a little lab room with no people to engage with.
And I'm actually an introvert, but I'm an introvert I'm an outgoing introvert. I like being around people, but I do get tapped out by people. So I have to have like a safe place to escape to. Even when I'm with my family, I'll just like run away and go hide outside for a period.
Which is another kind of burnout, right?
Yeah.
It's that people burnout when you're giving yourself and you're giving, especially you're so vivacious, you're chatty, you see people and can engage with them right away. That's got to be something that we address too. Latinas, it's just like, we grew up with the Monday, like, tell me, what, how can I help you? How can I help you? But that in turn does bring on burnout.
Hugely.
How do you deal with that as a person? Not as a coach necessarily, but as a person. How do you do that?
Well, I'm going to answer your question in kind of an abstract way, because I think it's really important to understand that with burnout, there's not just one type of burnout, in my experience. And I always throw the disclaimer in here that different burnout coaches are going to talk about the burnout. I actually find that there's 4 different types of burnout. There's the physical side of burnout, which is the exhaustion. Like that's often what people think of when they think of burnout. And if we're talking about, like, for example, presence with family, being with your family, and if you are somebody who's, introverted, or even extroverts, frankly, even extroverts have a limit to their extroversion. Like that is, you're not giving yourself enough time to recover after social events. You're not giving yourself enough time to rest and rejuvenate. There's much more we could get into with the physical side of burnout, but that's very much the self-care and the exhaustion side. There's also overwhelm burnout. So like, I can totally see little kids in a family environment, especially if you have like a big dynamic family and you're introducing like a toddler to the family for a first time. Imagine the overwhelm they feel. It's for adults, it's kind of the productivity side of burnout, but it is literally feeling like you have to field like 80 bajillion things at once. And it's overwhelming. So that's that toddler being introduced to the family for the first time. It's that kind of feeling where it's like, why does everybody want to hold me? Why does everyone want to touch me? Why are you throwing 80,000 names at me? I'm never going to remember all of these. And why does that lady look terrifying? Like, it's that, all of that, those things that get rolled together into that experience. That's overwhelm burnout. But I actually think what you're talking about is emotional burnout. Emotional burnout is probably my favorite kind of burnout, and how the World Health Organization defines this is they call it like emotional exhaustion. They might even call it cynicism. Emotional burnout's really, really interesting, and I think the reason why I like it is it's so multifaceted. But like what emotional burnout is it's like apathy. It's disconnection. It's kind of a lack of motivation or engagement. But what it also is feeling quick to tears or quick to anger. If you're somebody who's a constant people pleaser with your family, a constant fixer, that can eventually manifest as feeling like everything's being taken from you and there's nothing left for you. And it can manifest, I've seen it a lot with clients where they'll come into a session and they're trying to explain to me what's going on and they can't even get through the explanation without breaking down into tears because they just feel so emotionally overwhelmed trying to wrap their brain and their emotions and their words around what's going on in their world. I actually find that with emotional burnout, people pleasers are very susceptible to emotional burnout. People who don't have enough boundaries, which people pleasers often don't have enough boundaries, are very susceptible to emotional burnout. We also tend to socially isolate when we're in emotional burnout. So you might be like completely there for all of the people in your life, but when it comes to your own needs and the things that people might do for you, you don't let people be there for you. You kind of step away in those situations. You isolate yourself, especially when it's situations like emotional burnout and emotional exhaustion, because we don't know how to articulate what's going on, let alone what we need. And it can be very overwhelming when people come at you and you don't actually know what you need from them.
What if you do know what you need, but you need it so desperately by then because you are on the edge of burnout emotionally? And by then, you're so desperate that what you need has to happen, that asking others to do it risks them saying no or doing it poorly or not doing it, thinking you need something else that they can do for you. And then it's just like lights out. Nope, crash, burn, too late. How do we recover from that point? How do we learn to trust that someone's going to give us what we need?
It sounds to me like you are asking yourself to set a boundary or make an ask, and it's gotten to the point where it is a big ask. And that's the thing with boundaries is I feel like often the boundaries that we pay the most attention to and the boundaries that we feel like are the ones that we absolutely have to set are the ones that we start with. We need to approach boundaries just like we would approach building muscles in a gym. You're not going to start with the 50-pound dumbbells. You're going to start with the 5-pound dumbbells. And if you start setting the small boundaries, the easy asks, start with those and build that muscle up over time, then it gets to the point where making that big ask doesn't feel so uncomfortable.
How do you know those boundaries actually are protecting you as a person? How do you identify those little boundaries that don't seem like they need to be established?
Yeah, I honestly think quite literally a boundary is you can think of it like a fence. And we actually use the language of you crossed a line when people violate boundaries. So I would say what you start to look for are those little moments of irritation with people, those little moments where you're like, I told them not to email me at this email anymore. Why are they still doing that? Those irritations that we feel or frustrations that we feel are massive red flags that boundaries are being violated. But what I will also say is absolutely there are some situations where our boundaries are unreasonable. And I do think there are some situations where boundaries need to be negotiated.
So you're making the clear distinction right here, right now, that it has nothing to do with the emotional attachment, love, respect, honor to anybody, but this is your communication of loving yourself has been disrespected. And to love ourselves first before we're able to love anybody else. So we've gone through 3. We've done physical, we've done overwhelm, and we've done emotional. What's the 4th one?
The 4th one is, and I separate this one because it has different causality, but it's kind of an offshoot of emotional burnout. It's boredom burnout. We can actually burn out from boredom. I find it happens a lot with people who, maybe they just kind of feel like they're going through the motions day in and day out. Maybe their relationship starting to feel like they're going through the motions. Maybe their job starting to feel like they're going through the motions. And as a result of that, because, it takes a lot of effort to engage yourself in something that is not engaging, they can burn out as a result of that. And it's one of those things that it's like an easy to do, but easy not to do fix. You just need you need to mix things up. You need to mix things up in your relationship. You need to mix things up at work. We need some stimulation. We almost need some stress. Stress in and of itself isn't inherently bad. We actually, in terms of like productivity, we perform optimally when we're under stress. And I actually think it works the same way in a lot of other situations. I actually really have enjoyed speaking in that sense because people will throw questions at me and I have no idea where they're going. Even podcast interviews. People will throw questions at me and I have to think on my toes. It's a little bit stressful, but that stress is really adaptive. And when you aren't being stressed enough, that's actually when you start to veer into boredom burnout. You basically start to feel stagnant and stuck.
I hear that. But the first thing I think of when someone feels stuck is that you may not be living your authentic
That's
life,
very true too.
because authenticity will show you the areas that you fully always want to engage in. I understand the comparison into work because I think a lot of people are in a workplace where they're not authentically there for themselves. It's a way to pay the bills,
Yeah.
or it's a way to, we're told to, this is the next step,
Yeah.
or there's, it's the only job I can get. But authentically, they may be supposed to be doing something completely different. And rather than go through the
Yeah.
motions.
I will argue, though, I do feel like for some people, that's all they want out of work. And in that situation, I would say, okay, then you need to look for that authenticity and that fulfillment outside of work. I do feel like sometimes people, and I think this is a dangerous thing to do, I sometimes feel like we put too many eggs in the basket of profession. Sometimes your job might just pay the
Oh,
bills for that season
definitely.
that you're in. But that doesn't mean
Yes.
you stop seeking
hmm
out fulfillment. That fulfillment just might come from elsewhere. I think
It
that's a really
should
important
come
part.
from elsewhere.
Yeah, it should.
What are some of besides balance, because it sounds like this is all about balance, and also knowing that, one of the big, easy burnouts is all you do is work because it doesn't feed all your other zones of happiness, which I think, boredom is really something that I brought into my kids' life. Like, I did not program them. I did not say you have to do this, this, and this, because boredom really is a caveat for creativity.
Sure.
It
Boredom is
frees
not
your
inherently
brain.
bad.
It just steps out. Yeah, you can really step out. You don't want to always fill it, because then you could find a way, to sit in it and go, well, what
Yeah.
do I really want?
Yeah, and I will definitely add the caveat with boredom burnout that it is really about your lifestyle feeling
Yeah.
boring and not about having a boring hour on a Friday
Yeah.
afternoon. There's nothing wrong with the boring hour on a Friday afternoon. It's about literally being bored by your life.
What would some of the indicators in general, like how do people sit there and realize they're in some sort of burnout?
So physical burnout, we already talked about exhaustion, but I actually think another thing to look for with physical burnout is you're getting sick more frequently. So like repeated illness or just inability to recover from an illness is a big sign of physical burnout. But what it can also be is shifts in your basic self-care pattern. A big one for women is actually getting hungry, because when you're high cortisol, your body kind of slows down your digestion. So you're not getting hungry.
Mhm.
And it's weird. Like you wake up in the morning and you go for like 6 hours before you actually get a hunger response. That's abnormal. That means you're operating off of high cortisol. That's a sign of high physical burnout. So like those would be some of the core ones I see for people
Wow.
who are really in the depths of physical burnout. In overwhelm burnout, one of the most common things I see for overwhelm burnout is you're tired, but when
Oh,
your head hits the pillow at the
totally.
end of the night, you can't fall asleep because you're just spinning. You're just going. You can't shut your brain off. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a big sign of overwhelm burnout. But what we can also look for with overwhelm burnout is almost like an analysis paralysis. Like usually high achievers, for example, are very productive, very efficient. If you need somebody to get stuff done, you ask a high achiever or a high performer. But when a high performer is in overwhelm burnout, what usually happens is they struggle to get started on projects. They struggle to finish projects. Maybe they can't make decisions as effectively and efficiently as they previously could. So those are two of the big things I look for with overwhelm burnout. With emotional burnout, we actually touched on a lot with emotional burnout. That one is emotional reactivity, quick to angers or quick to tears. You just feel checked out, disconnected in your life. Those are the biggest ones. So, and then we already touched on boredom. Boredom is really that feeling like you're going through the motions, feeling like you're stagnant.
Yeah, those are really good indicators that are general. That's what I was intending. Some kind of general sense of, hey, this is how I'm actually feeling. And again, Western medicine is not good for legitimizing and validating women's healthcare. And so we do have to take it upon ourselves that this isn't okay.
Yeah.
This is not normal to be so tired, but not being able to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Or to not be interested. Very interesting about high cortisol not making you hungry, because that's usually a sign of oh yeah, I've got this down, I'm not hungry. I'm going to be that, and then we go into that whole Western medicine psyche or Western society psyche. Oh boy, that's going to make me thin. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
just the opposite.
That's a new one that I learned. I actually didn't know that 6 months ago, that wasn't a bad thing. But I think you've really pinpointed it. We celebrate that because diet culture and being thinner and, oh, I'm not hungry. No, we need to. I actually literally did a podcast earlier today where I interviewed a gal from my podcast and we talked about, she's a nutritionist. And she always says, you've got to fuel the hustle. If you're not getting hungry, you're not fueling the hustle. Not that we're like hustle culture here, but we've got to fuel ourselves to be able to get the things done that we need to over the course of the day. And if your body's literally signaling you to not eat, that is a red flag that your self-care patterns are off and that you're those normal signals in your body.
That is so valid. And so that goes down a deep rabbit hole that we could take. Like that niche alone could be an hour-long podcast about, how we frame eating and our stress response and, all I need is like caffeine to get me through it. It's like, no, you don't, sister. But also like I learned this recently about trauma, which a lot of this comes from, and in the trauma of the cortisol trigger. And the cortisol, we always hear of the fight or flight response. But one of the cortisol triggers I've learned also is the freeze response, which is what you were bringing up with the overwhelm, where you can't act, where procrastination is huge, where you don't know what to do and you get distracted and you just want to zone out.
Yep.
I never heard of that before until just recently.
Yeah, there's actually 4 different reactions in our stress cycle. Our stress cycle is fight, flight. Those are the common ones that we are known for. We either run away or we like are ready to put our dukes up.
Engage.
Or we can freeze, like deer caught in a headlights freeze. Or this is actually one that I didn't know existed for a really long time.
Okay.
We can fawn. And fawning literally means like when you're almost like overly complimentary of something, you're kind of like sucking up to somebody. We can do that when we're in a stress cycle because that's also protective. It's almost like a social protection. We're trying to get them on our side by fawning over it.
Oh, great. Whoa.
Isn't that weird? I never would have associated that with the stress cycle, but there's actually 4 potential reactions in the stress cycle: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Oh, the fawn one. I get it though, because you are so like fragile. That seems like when you're in a state of fragility where if one more thing goes wrong or one more ask comes your way, you're just going to crack and poof, be gone. And therefore you're surrounding yourself with people maybe that are even stronger or will be like your protective barrier by siding up against them.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we see women falling into this more than men?
The fawning
Is
category?
it societal? Just in general with the burnout.
I actually feel like it's probably relatively equal, but women are often more in touch with how their bodies feel, the emotions. It's still in a lot of places, in a lot of cultures, there's not a safe space for men to address the emotional part of things. But it's also part of the reason I personally don't work with a lot of men because I find men are a little standoffish to a lot of the emotional that I do. It doesn't mean they don't need it. I have to work with a client that's receptive to what I'm going to teach them. So like I find women are very in touch with the emotional sides. They know when they're socially isolating themselves. They know when they're checked out mentally and emotionally. I find that there's a self-awareness there that often is higher with women than with men. Not saying men aren't self-aware for anybody who might be listening. I understand that there are men out there that are self-aware, but I do think generally speaking, women tend to be more self-aware.
Yeah, at least to each other. Yeah, I think in both situations, you're right. I mean, it's like women will at least talk to each other where our society has told men not to.
Yeah.
Be strong, be the man, be all that. And they won't share because we've made it out that that's a weakness. A very sad story about a woman, and this speaks to a lot of the symptoms you just brought up. A woman who was only 39 years old and was feeling insanely fatigued, was feeling like something was off. And she had 2 businesses. She had 3 kids. And everyone's saying, adrenal burnout. You are doing too much. You're too much stress. You just have to stop. You have to stop. Without going beyond that with her, when in fact she had stage 4 lung cancer.
Yeah.
And so we really have to pay more attention to ourselves and demand. All 4 of these states of burnout come with a lot of, I'm going to say, desperation if you're at the point of burnout.
Yeah.
Where do you find the strength? How would you tell our listeners, how do you find the strength to advocate for yourself where this really needs to change for me?
That's a great question. Biggest thing, and I know this is a scary exercise to do, I will have them play it out. If you change nothing, what's going to happen? Where are you going to end up? What's going to happen? What are the consequences to your career, to your health, to your relationships, to your very quality of life and state of being? 6 months from now, you might be an absolute shell of yourself if you do nothing. And I know that's not what any of us. I think a lot of times we tell us it'll get better. But I would also encourage you to ask, how long have you been saying it's going to get better?
Back to what you were saying originally in your own situation, in your own life, that validation, that there's validation in being able to accomplish. So where do you find the validation for not based on accomplishment, but maybe just the joy and happiness of living a great life that you're choosing?
I grinned because I'm so glad you asked this. The podcast I released today on my podcast was basically about how to find your worth outside of your work. In that podcast, we talked a lot about, even sometimes we find our worth wrapped up in being a mom, or we find our worth wrapped up in being a spouse or a significant other. And I literally posted on Instagram, and I want to make sure I read it exactly how I posted it in relation to this podcast.
Yeah.
This is what I posted. I'm so glad you asked this question because it's so timely for what I shared today. If you take away your job and your marital status, or if you have children, who are you? And that can be a very hard question for a lot of us to answer. But I think that is, it's basically the internal validation versus the external validation. Sometimes we build our identity and our very sense of worthiness around some of these external factors that are wonderful things. You probably do wonderful work. You are probably a wonderful mom. You are probably a wonderful wife and significant other. Or if you're single, you're probably a wonderful single person. Shout out to the single people out there. But we have to know who we are outside of these external factors of success. So that is a really important question to ask, I would say, in this is, do you want to be defined? Is who you are authentically, since we've talked about authenticity so much.
Yes. Authenticity, Encuentras your voice.
Do you want it to be tied to these external validators of success, of womanhood? Because I would be willing to bet you don't.
Yeah, and I think it's a really powerful thing to answer.
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful thing to answer. And I just want to make the point because I feel like a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today is exceptionally grandiose. These are big questions. These are big concepts. Yeah. But I also want to say for everybody out there who's thinking damn, burnout recovery is hard. It doesn't have to. These things can all be tackled in very, very small doses. How we recover from burnout, I think, is with small lifestyle changes done consistently over time. And even if this question that I just posed to you, if you think of one thing that answers who you are outside of your job, your marital status, and being a mom, if you think of one thing, progress, that's moving the needle. And then if you think of another thing tomorrow or another thing next week, even these grandiose questions, we can break down into really, really small baby steps forward that can be incredibly, incredibly powerful when it comes to addressing burnout. That's why my podcast is called Burnout Proof, because I want us to burnout proof our lives. I want us to get to a point where burnout isn't an issue. We are burnout proof. And how we do that is with small changes made over time.
That makes it sound like, for anybody who's taking these small steps, which I love that you validate how important they are, it sounds like people are taking control of their life again. Like, I want this in my life. Well, I'm not going to wait for someone to do it. I'm not going to wait for it to come into my life. I'm just going to do it. And I'm worth that. And my happiness and my health are worth that. And therefore, if I'm going to be the one doing it, it shouldn't feel like one more thing because it really should be the first thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we burned out in any of those realms of roles, if you're doing it from external validation only and not internal fulfillment, what are you really bringing to that role? If you're not bringing your whole person, then what are you bringing? That's an interesting question, right?
I think that's a beautifully, beautifully put. Something that I've been doing for probably 8 years at this point in time in some capacity is I call it my weekly review. And basically what it is I sit down once a week. It might be like Friday at the end of the week. It might be Saturday morning over a cup of coffee. It might be Sunday night over a glass of wine. But some point between like Friday and Monday, I sit down and I ask myself 3 questions. What worked? What didn't work? And what can I improve? And I'm literally doing exactly what you just said.
My journal does that.
Yeah, I'm doing what you just said of capturing data from your life. These are the things felt good this week. And what that does is it helps you. And I think this is really important because we can feel like we just like suck at life and that we're doing everything wrong sometimes. It helps you pinpoint the things that you're doing right. And helps you show you that these are actually active stress preventers in my life. So these are the things that are working. These are the things that I need to continue doing. I think sometimes it can feel like you're doing nothing right.
So give me the Ellyn in your future. What does the Ellyn in your future look like?
It's hard to answer this question because I don't know what I'm going to like in 5 years, but I anticipate what's probably going to be Ellyn 5 years from now is I think Ellyn from five years from now, I think I'm basking in the thrill of speaking right now and I love it and it's super validating and I like the lifestyle, but I do think Ellyn in 5 years is probably going to have dialed back a little bit on how frequently I speak. I think I'm going to be a little bit more settled in terms of not jetting off constantly to do another speaking engagement. I hope that I will have written a book. And I honestly think that the biggest thing I want is 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I want to have my own kind of little slice of Pacific Northwest heaven. I cannot afford to buy a house anytime in the next 2 years, but I want to have my own little retreat in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Seattle. I love living in Seattle.
Oh, okay. We just manifested that. We have put that out to the universe. How do people get a hold of you? When they can find you on their schedule? How do people contact you? How do they find you out there in digital world?
I'm Coach Ellyn everywhere. And my first name is spelled Ellyn. But honestly, whether you are on Threads or on Instagram or on LinkedIn or whatever, Coach Ellyn is where you're going to find me. My 2 favorite places to spend time. I feel like I escape on Instagram and I feel like I'm productive on LinkedIn.
I love it. Yes, I love it. To power to more women, helping women live their best life without having to dabble into that burnout spectrum too deep. Oh, thank you, Ellyn. This has just been mind-blowing, eye-opening, like, wait a minute. Brought up some key points that I think I'm going to go make that list of, whoa, what's working, what's not working, like right now. That is awesome. Really appreciate your time and your knowledge and your love of helping people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I absolutely loved being here.
Okay. Are you all relaxed from realizing all the things that you can now let go of and live the life you want? Fabulous Ellyn Schinke, the Burnout Buster, inviting us to discover what is pushing us too far and how to get back to a beautifully balanced life. You can reach out to Ellyn through her website at www.coachellyn.com. That's Ellyn with ELLYN, and on Instagram at Coach Ellyn. Get some updates on her podcast, Burnout Proof, and get ready for a life without those stressors taking you down. So let's kick off this Hispanic and Latina Heritage Month with the freedom to just say no, to create the space that we can revel in joy in this epic, epic month coming up. So join us next week to kick it off in a way that's completely different than what we've done before. Because in order to truly champion our heritage and cultura, every week will be a full-length conversation with fabulous guests sharing their authentic stories and journeys to fully embrace and celebrate, champion, highlight, showcase all things Latine. Starting off the month of celebration is Mónica Islas, first-generation Chicana, certified athletic trainer, eldest daughter, and new small business owner who's determined to tackle pain epidemic, one person at a time. Her passion is fueled by her experience of growing up in a family of farm and factory laborers in the Salinas Valley and living through the financial, the mental, the emotional impact of pain and illness. Mónica intertwines curandera culture into her practices to empower, encourage, and redirect la comunidad towards building generational health and living pain-free without medication. You can catch up with Mónica on her website at bod-wellness.weebly.com. And bod is B-O-D. That's also for her Instagram at bod_wellness. And also on her LinkedIn profile. And all of this information will be for you in the show notes so you can easily click through and find her. There's so much healing available in our cultura. It's just in our DNA. And we're bringing these beautiful people to you worldwide so you are never alone with your experiences. Take a look at our Encuentras Your Voice social media on Instagram to get a sneak peek of our Hispanic Heritage Month guests with heritage stories from Mexico, Puerto Rico, Guatemala, and Texas. Yes, before it was a state. From podcasters to community builders and outdoor adventures to established authors. From Harvard grads to Ivy League hard pass. Our comunidad thrives in union as one beautiful tapestry created by the individual glorious threads of hundreds of millions. Get ready to celebrate big? Get your party spirit on. Push away, put up your boundaries to any stressors, and step into your invaluable truth, ladies. Ciao! We love that you have subscribed to this podcast and continue to champion women who understand the life of all things Latina. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Encuentras Your Voice podcast so you don't miss a single episode. They will automatically drop into your listening device each week. And we'd really, really appreciate if you take a moment to add to the reviews that we already have. Tell us what you like, tell us what you're hoping to hear, and we will get there. Share this with your friends and family to help us grow our comunidad and keep following us on our social media to Encuentras Your Voice. We are so grateful to you for helping us grow this community and would love to learn of all the amazing Latinas who you know are creating the world we thrive in. So reach out to me on social media at Encuentras Your Voice, and let's keep leaning into our authenticity in pride. Help us make Encuentras Your Voice the place where you are 100% represented.